what happened this week, Devin?
Not really.
You remember what we're gonna talk about this week?
Wives.
Wives? Like 90% of the girls didn't show up when we're talking about wives.
Well, 50% of the guys showed up, so.
Okay. I'm kind of scrambling this morning.
If Jacob comes in, 100% came in.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if he's gonna come in.
I don't think the girls are interested in being good wives. That's what I'm hearing.
Except for Adeline.
Except for Adeline. Adeline, what's your favorite wife verse in the whole wide Bible?
Life first?
Wife verse.
I don't know. It's not Proverbs 31, though.
It's not Proverbs 31? Why is that?
No, I like it. It's just, that's not my favorite. It seems to be the go-to verses, but.
Oh, that's for women. That's not for most guys. Let me tell you why. There's a fun one. All the guys seem to remember. All right. Proverbs 27:15.
Oh, the contentious woman.
Yes. All right. Proverbs 27:15. A continual dripping on a rainy day and a quarrelsome wife are alike, or a contentious wife are alike. So it would be better almost to be sitting next to a dripping roof on a rainy day and be in a marriage with a wife that likes to fight. We'll kind of take our dear sweet time and hope some people filter in here, but why are wives important? It's not necessarily a wrong answer to this one, but why are wives important?
That's the way God set it up, like marriage.
Okay, they're an essential part of a marriage as God established it. It's a pretty obvious one, but it might as well be said. What else?
She typically has more time around the kids, so she influences the kids more, I guess.
Okay, how many kids do you get if you don't have a wife in a godly marriage?
0.
0 unless you have some orphans running around you can adopt, right?
Yeah.
So a wife is essential to having kids, and that's part of God's plan for a marriage unless something goes wrong. She has typically I don't want to say more of an influence over the family than the husband, but at the same time, she is the one that typically spends more time around the home. And because she does that, it takes a more time-consuming role in rearing the children, typically in a godly family. She has more of an influence over how the kids turn out. And I'll throw this into, this is not always the case, but this is a pretty good general rule. How a wife goes is typically how a family goes. So if you have a wife that is contentious, she likes to argue, in other words, she's an ungodly woman, then typically the entire family is going to have a hard time being a godly family. Now, if the husband's doing what he's supposed to do, he can try to right that correction. But typically, if the woman is off the rails as a Christian, it's going to derail the entire family to a degree. The reason is, a husband should be the leader of his family, but he is influenced by his wife. That is why it is important for godly women to be elders' wives and deacons' wives, so they do not sway their husband in an ungodly manner. Excuse me. I have personally seen devout Christian men that were solid as a rock, and then whenever something happens with their wife, they follow their wife and are influenced in an ungodly manner. I'm trying to be as general as I can, non-specific, but I have seen that happen personally. Real quick, let's look at a couple more fun ones, and then let's get to the serious ones. Proverbs 25:24. Adeline, why don't you read that one for us?
It is better to dwell in the corner of the housetop than with a contentious woman in a wide house.
So it'd be better to live in a tiny spot on top of a roof with no roof over your head than in a house with a contentious wife. It's funny, and I like to smile at that one, but it is really true. If you have a spouse in general, not just a wife, but a spouse in general that likes to fight, it makes your entire life miserable. Let's read Proverbs 12:4 too. How about you read that one, Devin?
A virtuous woman is a crown to her husband, but she that maketh ashamed is as rottenness in his bones.
Okay. Yes, he has an excellent wife. What's your name?
A worthy
Virtuous.
woman.
Virtuous woman, okay. The virtuous woman there is the same as the virtuous woman in Proverbs 31 that everybody likes to read about. We're not going to read that one, but it is a good passage to read about wives. I like what it says here, though. Is the crown of her husband. So the wife, I like what the wife is the crown of her husband. Or makes him miserable. Right? We find both of those in Proverbs. What should those two passages together, or those three passages, two up here and one down here, what should those passages really drive home for us? Especially for you guys.
Probably like don't start like trying to find like too young.
Okay, that's not the direction I was going, but that's not a bad one. You're in the right train of thought.
Okay.
What are you right now?
A Christian.
You're a Christian. That's not where I was going, but you're also right there. What are you in terms of a relationship?
Single.
All right, you're not married at least, right? Even if you're dating someone, you are not married at this point, which means that you still have yet to make the decision of who you are going to marry. Knowing full and well that Adeline can either be the crown of her husband or make him completely miserable, and you knowing that the woman you marry can either be your crown, you know, your crowning thing that you're proud of, or she can make you absolutely miserable. It should really make you stop and consider who you're marrying. Because if you rush into something with a person you should not have entered into a covenant relationship with, then you find yourself in a situation where you are either miserable or unable to be the wife that you should be for a while. Does that make sense? Really drives home how important it is to choose your spouse. Because that person, this person right here, I'm going to draw a little circle right here. These two people are going to hold more influence over each other than any other person on the planet. More than their kids, more than the elders in their congregation, more than the preacher, more than their best friend in the whole wide world. Their spouse has more influence over their spouse than anybody else in the world. Who that person is that influences you is the most important decision you will ever make outside of becoming a Christian. With that in mind, let's also run to Proverbs 18:22. Adeline, you wanna read that one too?
Whoso findeth a wife findeth a good thing, and obtaineth favor from Jehovah.
Alright. Wives are good. And the reason we can know that is not only because God said it, but whenever you go back to Genesis, what was it that God would say after he made something? Three little words.
Well, this is more than 3 words, but he saw that it was good.
Okay, he saw that it was good. I gotta go check and make sure that there's not more words than I think there. Because I could be wrong. Nope, that's not Genesis yet, that's the preface. Yes, and God saw that it was good. Adam's wording was more on than mine. So anyway, he saw that it was good. You move on to day 6, where man was created. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. What was the last thing that God made in creation? Eve, right? Eve. He made a wife for Adam. That was the very last thing that he made. Not anything. The very last person that he made was Eve. And that's where he stopped. He stopped, and whenever he said, it is good, or he saw that it was good, that includes the husband and the wife. So a person that finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains the favor of the Lord. It's very important for us to remember. Let's run to Ephesians chapter 5. All right, Devin, why don't you read 22 through 33 for us?
Hold on, I gotta find it first. Ephesians 5.
22 through 33.
Okay. Wives, submit yourselves unto your husbands as unto the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it, that he may sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. For no man ever hated his own flesh, but nourisheth and cherisheth it, even as the Lord the church. For we are all members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife, even as himself, and the wife see that she reverence her husband.
Okay. What is God's last charge in that passage through the pen of Paul?
Let the wife see that she fear her husband.
All right, fear. The ESV and I think the New King James have respect. Respect. So we're not talking about a cowering in the corner, trembling because you're afraid for your life kind of fear. It is a respectful attitude, if that makes sense. So, why is the husband over the wife? A little bit of recap.
Because God said so.
Okay. God said so.
Cause Christ is the head of the church.
Right, Christ is the head of the church. And because God set it up that way. You were pretty spot on your first one. Christ being the head of the church is the example for us of the husband being the head of the wife. And that really should throw out any arguments against the patriarchy and misogyny existing in the church, and God hates women because he wants them to be below men. Well, the truth is that the husbands are still under Christ. They're just as submissive, just to a different entity, if that makes sense. So the wife is to respect her husband. Why is the wife supposed to respect the husband? Besides God said so. I can see those wheels spinning, Devin.
You got my go-to answer.
Why did God tell wives to respect their husbands?
Well, you can't be submissive if you don't respect your husband.
Okay, you're also called to be submissive. Because it's the same relationship that Christ has with the church. Does that make sense? Respect is an attitude. Submission is more of an act. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Respect is a motivation that drives submission, but it's the same attitude that the church has exactly toward Christ. Because, and think about this, if we have the church set up as a parallel for the wife, and the husband is a parallel for Christ, imagine how ridiculous it would be for a church that Christ established and that Christ bought with his blood, and that we become members of if we do not respect Christ. How ridiculous would that be? What would the point even be of the relationship we're in if we did not respect Christ? And that respect motivated submission to him. Well, in the same way, following that parallel, the wife is supposed to respect the husband. What is the husband supposed to be?
Well, like an example, like for the kids and stuff, being like Christ, like.
Okay. You're really close. What is the husband supposed to be? More than an example, he is called to be something for his family. Starts with a spirit, ends in an ul leader.
Spiritual leader.
Yes, he's supposed to be the spiritual leader for his family. If you look how God set up the family, he is supposed to be over the wife and over the kids, not just in mundane, run-of-the-mill household things like decisions on how to spend money, what we're going to do as a family, things like that. But we're talking about spiritual decisions. He's supposed to be the spiritual leader of the entire family. Now, just as Christ is the leader of the church, the head of the church, the husband is supposed to be the head of his family. If respect is not emanated toward him by both the wife and the kids, it's going to completely undermine him. You do not have a tendency, people in general do not have a tendency to listen and obey a person they don't respect. Does that make sense? If you don't respect someone, you're not going to follow them. So that is very, very important. Now let's go up here and look at verse 24. Adeline already came up with this one. 22 and 24 all actually. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. You guys have both been in the workforce. Is it easy to work for a boss that is not the best boss in the world?
Well, I mean,
Does it make you want to click your heels and shout that there are rainbows in the sky if you have to go to work where you have a bad boss?
no.
No, it's not easy to go to work typically whenever you have a bad boss. But whenever you are at work, you are working as if you're working for the Lord. Everything you are doing as a Christian, including the work you do. So you're supposed to work even whenever the boss isn't around. You're supposed to be consistent and not sandbag it or be lazy whenever the boss isn't around. Well, in the same way, wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. Whenever you are being submissive to the people God says to be submissive to, you are actually being submissive to God Himself. So whenever God tells husbands to be submissive to the elders of their congregation and to the commandments of the apostles and to God Himself, then we are being submissive to God in all three of those things. Whenever wives are submissive to their husbands, they are being submissive to God. The same way God tells everyone else to be submissive, the role is just different. Let's run over to 1 Timothy 3 again. Where'd we go? Which page is it on? Here we go. Adeline, chapter 3 of 1 Timothy. Could you read 11 through 12?
Women in like manner must be grave, not slanderers, temperate, faithful in all things. Let deacons be husbands of one wife, ruling their children and their own house as well.
Okay. What are wives called to be of deacons? And if they're called to be this for deacons, they're called to be this for every Christian wife.
Serious-minded.
All right, serious-minded. Let's call it sober-minded. I like that phrasing a little better. Sober-minded. You could say serious, and that is definitely not doing any harm to it. Sober-minded. Does that mean you can never crack a joke? Okay, I'm going to tell you guys a little secret as a parent, which most wives end up being. It is hard sometimes not to laugh whenever you shouldn't at your children. Whenever your kid is telling you some outrageous story to try to explain something that happened, it is really hard not to just smile and bust out laughing because it's funny. But the task at hand of disciplining your child is serious. So instead of busting up and laughing and just blowing it off, you have to treat it seriously. Get the entire story from them and then discipline them if they're telling you a big Wendy. Doesn't mean you can never crack a joke, doesn't mean you can't smile, doesn't mean that you can't have a good sense of humor. God Himself has a great sense of humor. We can see that in the writings of the Bible at times. But you need to be serious about serious things. You need to be sober-minded whenever it comes to really important matters. Disciplining your child, all spiritual matters, they need to be taken seriously. That's hard to do for some people like me sometimes because I tend to treat a lot of stuff with sarcasm. If I don't know what to say, or if I'm usually pretty awkward at conversations anyway, so I'll say something stupid or make a joke or that I shouldn't sometimes, or use sarcasm to cover up my uncomfortableness with the conversation just because I'm not great at talking to people. we need to be serious though whenever we are dealing with serious things. Dignified is what the ESV has. Dignified. How should a person with dignity conduct themselves? It's kind of tough.
In a sober-minded way.
Okay. Wow, good job using the previous answer to answer the next one. A person with dignity conducts themselves knowing who they are, if that makes sense. Not with arrogance, not with overconfidence, but with an understanding of who they are. A dignified person, in this case, knows that she's a child of God, knows that she has a serious job at hand, and doesn't belittle herself at all. Does that make sense? They also don't stoop to a level that they shouldn't. Whenever you think of dignity, a lot of times we tend to think of upper class people. People that conduct themselves, they always have on really nice clothes and they walk around kind of with their heads up high because they know who they are. They know that they're royalty in the case of places that have royalty. And you wouldn't see them stoop to doing something, something below their station. That's the case here with a wife. A wife should not stoop to doing something that is something that she shouldn't do. Something that is below a person of her station, below the station of a child of God, if that makes sense. I'm wording that pretty poorly, but I hope you guys get what I'm talking about. Not slanderers. Not slanderers. What is the sharpest part of your body?
Your mind.
Not in my case sometimes.
They're what's supposed to be.
That's good.
I guess you're going for the tongue.
Yes. That's what I'm going for. What's true and what I'm going for isn't always the same thing, but in this case we're talking about the tongue. You can use your mouth to cut somebody deeper than you could ever cut them with a knife, if that makes sense. You can say things that will cut them down to their very heart. And it's pretty easy done, especially whenever it comes to your spouse. Like I was telling you guys before, these two people have more influence over each other than anybody else in the whole world. Because they are so closely knit, the way a husband and a wife are supposed to be, you're able to hurt them more than any other person on the entire planet. You know what to say to hurt their feelings. You know what to do that pushes their buttons. So you're able to hurt them more than anybody else. Slander is something that is hurtful to other people. Now, typically, I don't think this is talking about just with the husband. I think this is slander in general. And a wife is capable of slandering just as much as any other person. Have you ever, you ever watch Andy Griffith? Okay, I know you've watched Andy Griffith before because your dad loves Andy Griffith, right? The old women, where would they go to gossip?
The hair salon?
Yes, okay, they would go to the hair salon, and the few times that it flashes into the hair salon, they're just clucking like hens in a hen house, talking about other people. And I always get tickled whenever you have an episode. They had several episodes about gossip. You would have somebody going down the street, and Barney would be talking to Aunt Bee, and they'd be talking about, oh, that woman, she's not blonde. She's a blonde from a bottle. He's only marrying her because, she got shipped in from overseas and she likes his money. They would sit there and just badmouth people and slander and say things that they didn't know for sure were true, but they said it anyway. And they would slander people. They would talk down to people. Why do people, I'm running behind. Why do people talk down about other people?
Make themselves feel better.
Okay, instead of building themselves up to get higher on the self-esteem ladder, they will tear other people down to where they feel taller, right? And it's easy to do. It's easy to do a lot of times because other people do it, so to fit in, you join the cloud of slandering. And we do not want to do that, especially wives, because and consider this, if you are around home more as a wife, and you're around the children more as a wife, who's going to hear you slandering more than anybody else?
Kids.
Your kids, usually, right? Because your kids pick up on stuff that even if you don't think they're listening, if they're around, they're usually listening to what's going on, the conversations you're having, and if you're slandering someone, the kids are picking up on that. And so that's going to teach them terrible, terrible habits. So a deacon's wife and Christian wives in general cannot be slanderers. And the tail end of verse 11, faithful in all things. Terrible handwriting. All right. Faithful in all things. Part of the hardest thing in having a Christian family for a husband or for a wife is consistency. Whenever it comes to raising kids, if you are a really good disciplinary parent, 90% of the time, but you let 10% of the stuff that you should discipline them for go, then you are undermining the message. You're sending them mixed messages because you are telling them one thing at this point and then letting that completely go at a different time. A wife has to be faithful in all things. You need to underscore that all, because it is very, very important. If a wife is partially faithful in most things, then she is not doing what God says to do. She's sending a mixed message.
Which, what you were talking about earlier, she should be submissive in everything, not just spiritual things. Like even humdrum things like he wants her to wear the red dress when she wants to wear her blue dress. Well, she needs to wear the red dress, you know. Not that he would be dictatorial like that, but
I don't know most guys that don't care what dress they're wearing, but
I was
yes,
just
I
giving an
understand what you're
example.
saying. If you have this family unit that we're looking at here, you have a husband that's being the spiritual leader that he is supposed to be. You have kids that are being raised, and they're doing a pretty good job of being future Christians or young Christians. And you have a wife that's only partially faithful. It's going to throw the entire thing in jeopardy, if that makes sense. It's going to undermine the message coming from the spiritual leader. It's going to give mixed messages to the kids that are either on their way to becoming a Christian or are already young Christians. It undermines everything. So she needs to be faithful in all things, to her husband and to God, and to the doctrines of God. Let's take just a split second and look at what a wife looks like from the world right now. What do wives look like whenever you look to the world and their views on what a wife should be? There's no wrong answer on this one. What do you see whenever you look to the world and see wives?
Probably like unfaithful to their husband.
Okay, a good majority are either unfaithful or unhappy. Unhappy with their spouse. What else? I say a good majority, a good portion. I wouldn't say a majority, but a good portion are unfaithful or unhappy. What else? This is kind of an obvious one, but I want to throw this out anyway. They're worldly minded a lot of times. They're just worldly people. It comes from being part of being in the world. What else? What about equal or above the husband? You see that anymore?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
You see it a lot more than you used to. Typically, back in the day, you go back hundreds of years or even several decades, you find most families in most cultures modeled after the pattern that God set up, where the husband was the head of the family. Nowadays, you do not see that at all. Largely because of a huge push from modern feminism, you see wives treated as complete equals in everything, in every sense, in leadership roles as well, or the wife has just superseded the husband, and most husbands are more than happy to hand the reins over to a wife. We cannot allow the world's standards for wives to dictate how we choose a wife for you, Devin, or how Adeline becomes a wife. Let's ask this. Jim's taking just a few minutes, a little extra here. Let's say there's a not ideal situation that we have, where we have a husband, we have a wife, doesn't matter if they have kids or not, and the husband won't do what he's supposed to. The husband is not the spiritual leader, he is just really, really lukewarm at best as a Christian, and you have a devout wife. Is the wife supposed to step up and lead her family in that case?
I guess if the husband was out of the picture,
Well, he's still there, he just is lukewarm, completely apathetic.
no.
Still a no, right? It's still a no. It's an easy trap for a wife to fall into, and I want you guys to understand she should never ever be put in that situation. But even if she's in a not ideal situation that should never have occurred, it still does not make it okay for her to assume a role that God does not want her to assume. What is the best solution there is to do the very best she can while still filling the role that God tells her to motivate her husband to be the person he needs to be. Let's run to 1 Peter if I can find it. I didn't write this down. Not finding what I want. Okay, let's go to chapter 3. And yes, there it is. There it is. It's at the very, very beginning. Chapter 3, verse 1. Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives. So even if you're married to an unbeliever or a Christian that is completely apathetic, by proper Christian conduct on part of the wives, it may motivate the husbands to become the people that they need to be, to become children of God. And that is something that is really powerful. I have seen people after decades become Christians because of consistent godly conduct on the part of their wife. And that is fantastic to see that the wife's hard work and being faithful to God through the decades paid off. When they see your respectful and pure conduct, you can throw this into, a wife needs to have pure conduct. Pure conduct. Nothing should be impure that she does, if that makes sense. Nothing should be dirty. Nothing should be sinful. This is important. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, in which God's sight is very precious. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves by submitting to their own husbands. Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling from the Lord. And you are her children if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. If a wife adorns herself, being the hidden person of the heart, with imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, she will never, this is a double negative, she will always be precious to her husband, regardless of what she looks like, regardless of her health, regardless of what other things are happening in the world, she will always be precious to him. She will be something that he could never do without until death. I wish I had more to say. We're already over on time by a considerable amount.
They haven't knocked on the door, so they haven't knocked on the door.
Not yet. I hear them. I think they're going to. But I want you guys to understand the roles that a husband and a wife are supposed to have in marriage. These are more general rules rather than whenever your wife asks you for $30 that you didn't budget for gas, give it to her or don't give it to her. These are general rules and principles to follow in whatever situation you're going to find yourself in as a husband and as a wife in the future. And if you guys are aware of these roles going into it, excuse me, then you are much more likely to be successful in being the people you need to be from the get-go rather than figuring it out as you go along the road. You guys have any questions about husbands or wives that we probably won't deal with this week, or we can deal with next week? No? Alright, I'm gonna take it for granted that they forgot to knock on the door. I'll go ahead and check. Thanks, guys. Sorry, I'm making you sashay down the table.